Alright, so that's hot. That stuff is turned off. I think we're ready to go. Are we ready to go? We're ready to go. Alright, let's go ahead and get this started. Okay, hello! Shadowcat back, and this is like... This is the first lecture of the year, actually. Because we took the first weekend off, we took New Year's weekend off. And then, we did a special tabletop stream. Which I don't have anything to report on that one yet, but I do have many children coming over for a birthday party today, so I'll let you know. I'll let you know how the Army Men game goes, assuming I can get them to sit down long enough to actually try it. Then we took a week off, and now we're here, so we're off to a great start so far. It's fine. I'll be honest with you, I almost didn't know what we were going to do this weekend. I didn't have any topics really lined up, but that's the way I kind of operate. I operate on inspiration only. And that does make things a little bit difficult. However, I got my inspiration this week when I heard the announcement of 2 series that were coming out. One of them I actually technically heard about before, but one series came out over this last couple of days. Another one is a game that's coming out in March, if I remember right. And both of them are stirring up a mild amount of controversy. But it's a controversy that I want to talk about because it goes to a very cultural issue. And so that's what we're going to discuss today. Now, today's topic is going to be on heroes and villains. And I know when I say that, immediately people are thinking like, hold on, we already did like a gaming stream last time, so what are we talking about heroes and villains today? We're not talking about games necessarily. What we're talking about is the heroes and villains in our stories. Because when we talk about stories, and I love to talk about stories, I love stories, okay? It's part of the reason why RimWorld is one of my favorite games, because RimWorld isn't really much of a game. The game of RimWorld comes into every individual scenario that you walk into, because when it comes to RimWorld, every single game that you start up is different. You will never land on the same planet twice. You will never land on the same tile of the same planet twice. You will never get the same colonist twice, and so every single time you do this, you are going to have a different experience. And part of that experience is, you are going to have, and this is guaranteed in every game of RimWorld that you have, you are going to have one character, one pawn, who is going to stand out. Maybe they're your best doctor, and they can save people from otherwise incurable diseases. Maybe it's your master builder, who pretty much built everything inside of your colony. Maybe it's your master craftsman, who has been working themselves to the bone at the tailoring bench, at the smithy, at everything else, clothing and arming and protecting every single person in the colony. Maybe it's your master researcher, who is so intelligent that they have discovered all of the forgotten knowledge that you're using to advance your colony. You are guaranteed to have a hero like that, or of that caliber, inside your colony. Similarly, you are almost guaranteed to have some kind of villain in your colony. You're going to have somebody who either doesn't do any work, or they have constant mental breaks because they're unhappy about something or other. Maybe you have a greedy person who is constantly upset because they don't have the best room. Or you have an addict, and they're addicted to hard drugs that you just don't have, and even if you were to give them to them, hard addictions always lead to things like kidney failure. And so you're left with a choice of, do I give them the drugs and watch them die? Do I not give them the drugs and let them continue to have tantrums? Or maybe they break so hard, maybe they try to actually murder somebody else. You will have a villain in your colony almost every time. That's not a guarantee. Having a hero in your colony is a guarantee. Having a villain, there's times when you don't have them. But you will always have that. The reason being that we make the heroes and villains of our stories. Now, sometimes we center the story around the hero and villain, but these heroes and villains always pop up. We can even look to real life, where we have real-life heroes and villains. And these are almost always painted in the perspective that we as a community share. A really great example would be Donald J. Trump. Now, whether he is a hero or a villain depends entirely on your cultural perspective. If you're on the right side of politics, he's a hero. If you're on the left, he is an absolute villain. And so this becomes part of our culture, and it becomes part of the stories that we tell, and it becomes part of the values that we try to pass down, because when you get down to it, heroes and villains are less people and more symbols. When I talked about RimWorld, and I talked about the heroes, the doctors who save people, the builders who build, the crafters who craft, the researchers who learn, why are these people heroic? It's because these people share values with us. We, as people, would like to see, doctors who can fix everything and cure everything. We would like to see builders who can build us homes who will last for generations. We would like to see, the smartest people leading the forward edge of all of our greatest research. And we look at our villains. These villains are in general destructive in some way, or they serve to harm our general community and well-being. Which is why when I bring up Trump, it's a great example. Is he a hero? Is he a villain? It depends. On the right, he's a hero, because he stands up for all the values that they also stand up for. On the left, he's a villain, because he opposes everything that they stand for. And so when we look at these things, they are subjective because symbols in general are subjective. But it doesn't stop them from being a major part of our culture, going back for centuries. We can go back to, and if I remember this right, the first recorded story came out of, and correct me if I'm wrong in the chat, I believe it came out of Sumeria, because it would have been the Epic of Gilgamesh. And that was the first story that we were able to recover and translate, and to really get a sense of what was the Sumerian culture like. We had artifacts from that time period. We had pots, we had paintings, we had tools, we had all kinds of stuff. But it wasn't until we picked up the Epic of Gilgamesh that we really got a look into who were these people. What were the things that they prized, that they valued? And it gave us great insight into what kind of a civilization it was. But this is also true moving up through all of the other different civilizations and cultures. And I'm not going to go into a very long description of this, but just to touch on a few very important parts. When we look at these stories that were floating around in different cultures, we go to places like China. We can read stories like The Journey to the West, which was a great but somewhat cautionary tale on not just how to be a great person and command great power, but how to use such power in a responsible way for the betterment of yourself through the betterment of your country. When we go to places like Germany, everybody is familiar with the German fairy tales. Many of them were copied and adapted by Disney, which is where people get their first mistaken impression of a lot of these German stories. Many of them, however, had a tendency to end up horribly because they were also cautionary tales. They would show largely normal people. A great example would be Hansel and Gretel. Normal children who ended up in a situation that was far beyond their ability to handle it, and because they were too trusting, because they didn't question, because they were irresponsible in going into the forest in the first place, they ended up dead. Which is, in general, how most German fairy tales ended. They're just dead. Of course, the purpose of these stories was to impress upon younger children that the world is a dangerous place. And when you consider what Europe used to be like, where you had many of these tribal nations who were almost constantly at conflict, yes, the world outside was invariably a dangerous place. And so they would use stories and allegories to pass on these lessons to children in a way that children could easily digest until they were old enough to learn the proper lessons and find out what those allegories actually stood for. So storytelling has been a big part of human culture since the days of antiquity, and that continues today. And so before we get into that, I do see that JP is in the chat. Hello, JP. I never actually popped out my chat, so I can barely read it, but I can fix that now. There we go. Now I can read it. The funny thing is that YouTube doesn't actually tell me you're in here. It still says only one person in the stream, and that's been sitting at 1 because I have it running on my other screen. YouTube is unreliable. Anyway, now that I got that, let's get into the subject of today. Now, we're going to go back a little bit further, and I want to talk about moral panic. Okay? I want to talk about moral panic. And the reason why I want to talk about this is, as I said, stories are a vessel, and the characters in them are symbols. These symbols represent our virtues and our cautionary fears that we should be abiding by and avoiding respectively. These stories themselves are a way to impart the morals of our generation, of our culture, onto other people. As such, when we come across something that tends to go against our culture, we tend to push back on it. Again, we can see this in modern day times when we look at somebody like Trump, who has become the actual villain of so very many stories. Some of them taking place in allegory, like going into like movies and TV shows where they will have somebody with extremely orange skin and bad hair who sounds like an absolute extremist, and of course they're not named Trump, but you know what they're doing, to people actually weaving narratives that the man himself is going to end up doing very bad things. We will tend to take anyone who goes against our culture and weave them into stories so that we can easily pass on the message of not just what we want people to know, but the morals and principles that we want to be conveyed along with those. To this end, I'm going to take us back in time to, what would it have been? It would have been like the late 90s, early 2000s, I think. I want to take it back to the days of Mortal Kombat. Does anybody else out there remember Mortal Kombat? I'm sure you remember Mortal Kombat. No, not the movie. Although that movie was fantastic. It was fantastically bad, but it was fantastic. No, I want to go back to the actual Mortal Kombat video game. In all of its blood-splattering, spine-ripping, decapitating glory. The first game to introduce the idea of finishers, where once your opponent was defeated, you didn't have to just let them fall down and accept victory. No. No. You could end them permanently. You could freeze their bodies solid and then shatter them into a million pieces so they could never rise again to fight you until you put in another quarter. And another quarter. Another quarter, another quarter. By the way, those machines were predatory. However, the fact is that when Mortal Kombat came out, it it started something. It stirred a panic. And this was not the first panic. I mean, we can go back to the panic of action movies in the 80s. We can talk about no, not even that far back. We can go back to the hippie music of the 60s, the rock and roll of the 50s. I think the 40s are pretty chill. I think we kind of took the 40s off after World War II. We had enough going on there. But I mean, even then, you had the scare of, like, the Nazis. But that was kind of justified, actually, so I think we'll give that one a pass. But we talk about, like, moral panics. We're talking about people pushing back against something they see as a threat to their culture. Rock and roll, of course, was the devil's music. And if you listened to it, it would put subliminal messages into your mind and you would go to hell. The same thing was true of the hippie music in the 1960s. This was Soviet music. They were putting it into our culture to weaken us so that we couldn't fight them in Vietnam and Korea. And so on and so forth. I mean, Dungeons and Dragons, which, by the way, just as a reminder, I'm still looking for one more person to join my group so that we can get started on our own tabletop games. But Dungeons and Dragons was, of course, a tool of the great Satan, and children who played Dungeons and Dragons were actively practicing witchcraft, and thus they would go to hell. I see that Blizz is in the chat. Hello, Blizz. Good to have you here. Let's see. What was the great big moral panic of the 90s? Right, that was video games. That would have been Mortal Kombat. Of the early 2000s, I don't recall what it was in the early 2000s. No, actually, wait, I do remember what it was in the early 2000s because we're going to get to that later. But when it came to the 90s and the moral panic around Mortal Kombat, they said that everything bad that was happening in children was the fault of these video games. And they would point to Mortal Kombat being this bloody, gory, pixelated game and said, this is the cause. Even though absolutely nobody with half a brain would accept that video games were going to be the cause. Of course, you had some parents who went along with it and said, oh no, Johnny can't have a Sega Genesis because there's games on there that would make him a bad person. But in general, most people did not care, most people did not say anything, most people did not do anything. And it existed on the fringe of people who who were looking to be offended by something. And they found somewhere that they could really sink their teeth into. Later on in the early 2000s, we had the same moral panic over Grand Theft Auto, where you could literally get into a car, pick up a hooker, rape her, then you could kick her out of your car, beat her to death with a baseball bat, get back in your car and run over the body. And people took one look at that, they clutched their pearls so tightly, and they said, won't somebody think of the children? What are they learning? Even though most children actually were doing just fine, and I mean, it's not like the movement ever really hurt Grand Theft Auto in the first place. I even seem to remember that when Grand Theft Auto 5 came out, there were a few places who actually did manage to get Grand Theft Auto 5 pulled from stores. I think Target was actually a really big story when they caved to the pressure and pulled all copies of it. I don't know if you've noticed this, but Grand Theft Auto has been growing and still going strong after 10 years. So they accomplished absolutely nothing. And the funny thing about this is that just recently, like a few months ago, I think it was a few months ago, maybe it's only a couple of months ago, we got the announcement of the next Grand Theft Auto game. Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to be coming out. And the game is not even out yet. Okay? The game will not be out until next year. Assuming, of course, that the planet still exists next year. But even that being the case, we are already seeing a moral panic over this. Why? Does it matter? We can ask why is there a moral panic over this, but the answer is it's because it's the same people, the same arguments, the same thing all over again. Why? It's because it's violent. It's because it features a game where you actually commit multiple crimes, multiple felonies. If it's anything like Grand Theft Auto 5, you're going to shoot people, you're going to commit murder, you're going to commit pretty much every vehicular crime we have laws for. And at the rate we're going, given the fact that now virtual rape is a thing, at least over in the UK, and people are being arrested for it, who knows, we may actually see the introduction of new laws where you can be arrested for what you do in Grand Theft Auto. Who knows? It's a brave new world. But we can see already the game is not out, it's not going to be out. And this article is actually from December 5th, so the trailer had only been out for like a month, I think. And already a moral panic. So in every new generation, a Grand Theft Auto game is born, and a moral panic rises to meet it. So it is with GTA 6, the latest installment in the nearly 30-year-old franchise, which released its first trailer on Monday. Okay, so not even a month old at this point, and already. By the way, this is from Vice, and I'm sorry to be inflicting Vice upon you, but it was the best article I could find. Again, save your condemnations to the end. I will accept all of them. I deserve it. So, yes, it says right here... let's see. Blue Checks on X have declared it degenerate. The Independent published a pearl-clutching op-ed, conspiracy took off, and dozens of YouTube videos with the word woke in the title gained a few more views. And that's just from the right side of the aisle that cares about the woke stuff. We haven't even gotten into the evangelicals. And they're not just on the right, we have evangelicals who have a broad spectrum of affiliations. But this is just the political faction going after it. And why do I want to talk about this? I mean, why should we care? Why would we even want to give them the attention that they are so desperately seeking when they do this? Well, because we actually do kind of need to. Because as I stated before, when it comes to stories convey our morals, values, and principles through symbols that we call characters. And what happens when we have one message that goes against the culture? It gets attention. So what we have here is a case that we've been through many times before, where we have a game that came out with a message, and this message is basically glorifying this criminal culture. Now, by and large, I do think that we could all agree, if any of us actually lived in the world of Grand Theft Auto, or as I like to call it, New York City, most of us would flee for our lives. Because who would want to live in that? Nobody wants to live in that, okay? At least nobody who's not actively a part of the problem to begin with. And JP wants me to say something like a Dalek. I don't think I can do it. Because Daleks have that vocal synthesizer, and I can't do that. So I'm sorry, I just can't do it. Maybe if someday I get like a Stream Deck or something and I learn how to use one of those, then I can do that. So I'll see if I can arrange that. But anyway, as I was saying, what we have here is a message that goes against our culture. And this is actually a shared culture. When I say that nobody would want to live in the world of Grand Theft Auto, I'm pretty sure that is a pretty broad spectrum declaration. Like, obviously, most of your people who are law and order conservatives would absolutely look at the world of Grand Theft Auto and say, oh yeah, no, just look, lock the character on 5 stars, send in the military, don't ever let them leave again, law and order by force. But even people who are more middle of the road or even liberal would look at GTA and say, okay, it's a fun game, but I absolutely would not want to live there. So the question then becomes, if you wouldn't want to live there, why would you tolerate the game where you play there? Now, of course, there's two sides to this. Number one, of course, is the very simple one. It's a game. It's not real. Okay? It's absolutely not real. However, just because it's not real does not mean that it does not share important aspects with our culture. And to do this, I'm going to go to a cultural icon of the last decade. Now, who do you think it is? Okay, put your guesses in the chat. I'll give you a hint. It's going to be in major cinema, okay? Like mainstream movies. Who is the cultural icon that I am going to be referencing? Maybe that's a bit more broad. I'll give you another hint. It comes from a Disney movie. Okay? So how about this? I'm going to grab myself a drink. I'm going to give you a chance to answer it. Seriously, give it a try. Give it a try. And I'm going to do this. Oh, yeah. That's the good stuff. I have myself a bottle of soda. And it's Werner's. And if you don't know what Werner's is, you're missing out. It's ginger ale that you can only get from Michigan. I had to have it special ordered. Okay, now we got that done. JP is guessing Spider-Man. You are close. You're close, but you're not on it yet. So, the cultural icon of the last decade from Disney is Thanos. JP says, yay, Werner's. Do you get Werner's over there? I had to special order mine. That's not fair. Oh, and Blizz said Goofy. Nope, it's not Goofy. I did say major films, though. So, the cultural icon I want to talk about is Thanos. Now, why am I talking about Thanos? Well, the reason I want to talk about Thanos is because we had many characters who showed up at the beginning of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We got Iron Man, we got Thor, we got Captain America, just as our big three. And then we got a whole bunch of other ones. We got Spider-Man, we got Black Widow, we got Hawkeye. We got a lot of different characters in there. As is befitting, you know, something of the scale of the Marvel Universe, cinematic, comic, or otherwise. But one of them was really a standout, particularly in the cinematic universe, and that was Thanos. Now, why was that? Well, we got our first look at Thanos in the stinger after the first Avengers movie. And we only saw him for a minute. It was enough for people to recognize who he was so that they could begin to set him up. And at the point, anybody who wasn't really into comics at the time, which was me, because I had no idea who Grapeface was. I had no idea, but anybody who did know went, oh yeah. And then we didn't see him for a while, until Guardians of the Galaxy rolled around. We saw Guardians of the Galaxy, we also got to see more of Thanos. We got to see what kind of person he was. And he was an intimidating figure, to be sure, but we saw him as being the schemer, the planner. He was sitting on a throne. He wasn't getting involved. He was working through proxies. He was working to organize things because he had a long-term plan. just like the creators of the first, what was it, first 3 phases of the MCU, had a long-term plan for him. So they were able to set this stuff up ahead of time. And we got to see Thanos, and we got to really kind of get a feel for him in his brief conversation with, what was his name? Roland? Something like that. Tattooed hammer guy. That's all I really remember. Anyway, we got to see a little bit more of him. Okay? And then he kind of went away for a while. Until we got to the actual Infinity War. Because now we got to see what we were building up to, what all of these stones were for, what kind of power they held, what could they do, and now we were going to see Thanos put them all together and really just start tearing across the galaxy. So Infinity War opened up with him invading the Asgard ship. By the way, spoilers ahead if you haven't seen these movies already. They were only like one of the biggest cultural benchmarks in Western cinema. Anyway, the movie starts out with him just laying waste to the Asgard ship, and pretty much everybody is dead except for Thor, Loki, and one-eyed guy with the sword. I don't remember his name. And it starts off with him just beating everybody up. So Thor, ragdolled, Loki, dead, Hulk, pulped. I mean, he's just going through and he is being the villain that we all wanted him to be, okay? He is absolutely just omnipotently powerful. Okay? His power is absolutely unparalleled. And so it's like, okay, fine, great, big villain. This is going to be a great fight. And then something happened. Later on in the movie, after they realize what they're up against and they manage to track Thanos down to his homeworld, there is a moment where Thanos meets our heroes. And under normal circumstances, you would think that this is where we're going to share a couple of quips, and then we're going to get into the fighting. There's going to be punching and throwing things and lasers and everything else. It's going to be a great fight, and that did happen. But first, they talk. Now, this is actually a really great moment, because the best villains talk. You want your villains to talk. You want your villains to exposit. You want to know not just what are they doing, but you want to know why they're doing it. Because it's the why that really makes all the difference. I mean, we go to war all the time. War is objectively a terrible thing. What makes it less terrible sometimes is when we can all agree that we're going to war for the right reason. And so what Thanos is doing, and again, I warned you, spoilers, like if you don't want spoilers to these old movies, you're going to have to go somewhere else. What Thanos is doing is he's trying to get together this thing called the Infinity Gauntlet, which will give him literal godhood powers. With a snap of his fingers, he will be able to reshape the entire universe and reality itself however he sees fit. And what is he going to do with it? Well, he is going to massacre half of the population of the universe. Every single planet, every single species, every single civilization, known, unknown, or otherwise. All of it. 50% right off the top. And we look at this and we say, that is so far beyond the pale. How could you even begin to consider doing this? And thus we get into his justifications, again through exposition. Because he lived on a planet that suffered, and by the way, this might sound familiar, keep that in mind. He lived on a planet that was suffering from gross overpopulation. There were entire swaths of his home planet that were literally starving to death, and nobody had an answer. And so, he said, look, we only have two ways to fix this. More food or less people. We have done everything we can to grow more food. It's not working. That only leaves one answer left. Less people. And so, in the movie, he explains that he submitted to whatever governing body was on his planet a proposition. A lottery. Basically a coin toss. Every single person, regardless of status, whether they were rich, poor, wealthy, impoverished, flip a coin. Heads, you live. Tails, you die, for those who will live. And of course, his plan was rejected because it was regarded as madness. After all, Thanos, if you haven't read the comics, is called the Mad Titan. So he was rejected. And of course, everything that was warned came to pass. The starvation increased until there was literally no food left, and then his planet went into an extinction level crash, and now he is the last of his kind. So, he formulated a plan once he found out about the Infinity Stones. He had a gauntlet created that would hold them. He sent his minions out to find them, so that once he had every stone in his power, he would simply be able to snap his fingers. And once he did, half of every living thing would be wiped out. It would solve every single resource problem. There would now be food for everybody. There would be housing for everybody. There would be space for everybody. There would be room to grow again. It would save every single struggling population. Now, of course, Thanos is the villain of these movies. But what's really, really weird is how many people resonated with that thought. How many people who looked at the movie and then looked at the Earth and said, if I had that gauntlet and I could wipe out half of the population of Earth because we are an overpopulated planet, I would snap my fingers. And this gets to the crux of what today's conversation is going to be. Because we're not going to be talking about Thanos and the Avengers all day. I wanted him in here as an example. Because stories are a reflection of our culture. The stories that we tell and the way that we interact with those stories is a reflection on what do we actually believe, what do we value, what do we prize. And a whole lot of people came out of the theater after seeing Infinity War and said, you know what? I am actually in agreement with the genocidal psychopath. And when you look at people who will look you straight in the eye and say, I agree with the genocidal psychopath, it then begs that you look at what kind of culture do we live in where not only would people agree with him, not only would we find this acceptable in any way, shape, or form, but not just one person or two people, but a lot of people. What has become of our culture, our morals, our values, that this is now seen as acceptable? And this is where we get into the idea that the stories that we tell and the stories that we pass down are the time capsule of our values. Because this is what we're putting forward. And if we have people agree with it, we have a problem. Now, to be absolutely fair, and we are going to be absolutely fair here, regardless of the number of people who agreed with Thanos walking out of the theater, Thanos was still the villain of the movie, okay? And this story, of course, spanned over 2 movies, Infinity War and Endgame. So it spanned over those 2 movies. Thanos was the villain in both movies, and our heroes fought tooth and nail to stop him. And because it is, a Disney movie, eventually they did succeed in the end. But we can already see how there is a segment of the population whose message is already counter to the dominant culture. And thus began a moral panic over that, because, well, we've had people that have been complaining about overpopulation for a long time now. Which, overpopulation, not really a problem in the world right now. We have problems in specific areas because of population density. But overpopulation? No, not really our problem. Not yet. We have lots of room to grow so far. And we've discussed that in previous lectures. Specifically when it came to things like, climate change, carbon control, things of that nature. Not going to get into that. We've done that discussion before. So this was the cultural or the moral panic that came out during the MCU. At least the first 3 waves of it. There's been other moral panics afterwards. Not going to get into those. And I mean, if you really want to get into those moral panics, there's other people that have done it a lot better than I have. They actually do hour-long videos and they put in actual work. Whereas I do not put in any actual work. So, that brings us kind of to today. Now, in case you hadn't known, on Friday, Amazon Prime released the long-awaited and highly anticipated Hazbin Hotel. Now, if you've been on YouTube for a while, you probably heard of Hazbin Hotel, but if you haven't, it's probably because it didn't get a whole lot of fanfare. It got a lot of attention in cartoon communities because it was very well done. But afterwards, it kind of went into development hell for a while, and it completely fell off the face of YouTube. Still though, the pilot is on YouTube, and the first episode of Hazbin Hotel is on YouTube, so if you wanted to go watch those, you are free to go watch them. For right now, however, I just want to cover what this show is, and then I want to talk about the controversy around it. So for those unfamiliar with the concept of Hazbin Hotel, it's actually very simple. Hazbin Hotel takes place in hell. Specifically, it takes place in the part of hell where all of these sinners go, all the human souls who could not make it into heaven. This is where they end up. And the story centers around the main character here, front and center. Her name is Charlotte Morningstar, otherwise known as Charlie. She is the literal daughter of Lucifer, okay? She is the princess of hell. And the way hell works in this universe is that hell is basically a catch-all for anybody who cannot make it into heaven. There's no mention of limbo. There's no mention of purgatory. You either go up or you go down. And most people go down. And so what happens is, just like with any filter, eventually you have to clean it out. And so once a year, the angels of heaven send down exterminators into hell, and they massacre the population of hell. That helps keep the numbers down. And then you have an entire year for it to fill up again, and we start the process over again. Rinse, repeat, forever. And of course, since Charlie here is the Princess of Hell, this is her domain. At least in part. And she cares about it. She's like, this is my responsibility. The people here are my responsibility. And so I want to do the best for them, which means that I need to keep them from being massacred en masse. So, how do we do that? Her plan is, as long as people are in hell, they are going to be subject to the extermination. We can't just stop the extermination. So, better plan. What if we took all of these sinners and rehabilitated them, okay? We'll take them in, we'll clean them up, teach them the error of their ways, and then, once they are a virtuous soul again, they will not be eligible for existence in hell. In fact, they'll be eligible for existence in heaven. So, rehabilitate the sinners, they rise to heaven, and they are spared the extermination. Now, of course, her plans are grandiose, and she thinks that she can reform the entirety of hell, and everybody else thinks it is an absolutely ridiculous concept. But not her, and so she goes on with it. However, with only 4 episodes out, and with it finally gaining mainstream attention, of course, the pilot was on YouTube for years, it's only now getting attention because it's on a mainstream platform, Amazon Prime. But now that people are actually seeing it, there's a lot of people that are very upset about it. And they're upset about it because of, well, it's in hell. And it paints the people that are in hell as either being poor, unfortunate souls. Do not start singing the song. Don't sing it. Or they're painted as being generally good people. After all, Charlie is the literal princess of hell. And she's probably one of the nicest people you could ever meet. She does have a mean streak, but even she gets upset when it comes out. So you have all these people in hell who are generally viewed as good people. And of course, then you have heaven and the angels, who are painted as the absolute worst kind of people you could imagine, who not only come down to hell once a year to massacre the population, but as you find out in the very first episode, they do so with a smile on their face and a bounce in their step because, as they admit, they enjoy it. This is an annual celebration for heaven. We get to go down and massacre. Guilt-free. I mean, nobody's getting kicked out of heaven for this. In fact, you're getting commended. The more demons you slay, the more you get commended. So we have an entire story here where heaven and hell have been flipped in terms of what's good and what's bad. We are celebrating all of these sinners who are in hell. And of course, if you're a sinner in hell, you did something to get there. Let's see. In the case of the characters on here, if I can remember right, this guy here overdosed on drugs and died. So, I mean, his primary sins were, gluttony, probably greed, and given what he does in the show itself, absolutely lust. So, yeah, he's down there. Her, don't know much about her. However, she is kind of like the bodyguard / bouncer at the hotel, and that little spear of hers, she likes to whip out at a moment's notice. So, her thing is absolutely wrath. And him, man, just put him on a wheel and spin it. Because I'm pretty sure he's guilty of all of them. Point being, everybody who's down in hell is down there for a reason. And so the pearl-clutching evangelicals saw Hazbin Hotel come out, and because they're only now seeing it, despite the fact that the pilot came out years ago, mind you, these people don't do a lot of work. They certainly don't actually go out and watch a lot of content. But they clutched their pearls and they said, how could you possibly do this? Look at what you're promoting. And that's partially true. Now, I will only say partially true because much like the video games that we were talking about earlier with Mortal Kombat and Grand Theft Auto, they are games or cartoons or whatever, okay? They're fine. Nobody in their right mind is taking this stuff seriously and following what they say here, okay? Nobody is going to take a look at this character here, who in the show is a porn star, and say, wow, I want to be a porn star. Because he did it. And by the way, for what it's worth, he is shown being a porn star in the series, and it is shown extremely unglamorously. Not graphically, however, it is shown to be the dark and horrible thing that it actually is. But still, that's not good enough. Because the fact that we have good people down there in hell is offending people, and it is causing the absolute most minor of moral panics. But something that's a little bit more interesting, I think, because this is nothing, okay? I don't care about this. Nobody really cares about this. It has failed to even really gain traction on the internet, with a few people commenting on it, myself included, and that's about it. But what I think is actually kind of interesting is there's also a game coming out as of March, I believe. And I didn't even know this was coming out, and I'm not going to play it. I really don't care, but I need to comment on it anyway. There's a game coming out in March based on the Suicide Squad. Didn't see the movies, haven't read the comics, don't really know anything about it at all except that it exists. But this is the video game Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. And the entire purpose of this game is literally written in the title. You are going to play as, I don't know, either one of or all of the Suicide Squad, who are all villain. If you're unfamiliar with the Suicide Squad, they're all villains in the DC universe who have been literally press-ganged into serving the government to do the dirty jobs that nobody else wants to do. And when I say press-ganged, I mean each one of them basically has a grenade strapped into their neck. It's a tiny one, but it's enough to blow their head clean off. So you're going to go and do what the government tells you to do, or you're not going to do anything ever again. So that's the entire the entire idea of the Suicide Squad. And now we're going to send them out. This is going to be kind of like an alternate universe where the Suicide Squad will act together to track down and murder every single member of the Justice League. So Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern, who else? I don't know. After that, it gets a little bit fuzzy because they add in a whole bunch of characters. Like, I remember there being a Hawk Girl, but I think that might have been in the cartoon only. And there was a Martian guy who could, like, turn into snakes. I don't remember all of them. But anyway, I don't know how many of the Justice League will be in the game, but your job is to kill them all. Kill them all of them, every single one. Murder them. And then there'll be no more Justice League. And of course, people are losing it over this game too. Why? Well, because you're going through and you're going to kill Superman. And you're going to kill Wonder Woman. And you're going to kill Batman, which people are a little more ambiguous about. But regardless, you're going to go through and you're going to kill all the heroes. And what does that say about the people who are making the game? What does that say about the people who are playing the game? What does that say about our culture as a whole? Because when we made these comics, the comic books were made to be inspirational. The heroes that we have, like Superman, were made to give us something to aspire to. Superman and Captain America in particular, both figures that came out during the World Wars, to give us something that we could say, yes, this is a great person. This is something that we should be more like. These are the values that we should uphold. And now, some 80 years later, we have Suicide Squad kill the Justice League. Now, on a certain level, you can look at this and say, it's a video game. Who cares? And that's absolutely true. We can also look and say that, this is expression. This is freedom of expression. This is creative liberalism. Okay? These are all things that we in general value in the West. And so you can't say no to this. You literally fight for this. It's in the constitution of almost every single Western nation in some way, shape, or form. The U.S. has its Bill of Rights, and the First Amendment includes the freedom of speech and publication. Canada has its Charter of Freedoms. I don't know what the UK has. Something probably written on parchment and with ink that was still made out of squid. But I'm sure they have it too. And so there's absolutely no reason why we can't do this. It's not illegal. But it does raise questions as to who are we as a people if we're going to put something like this out. And on that note, I want to talk about something a little bit tangential. I want to talk about Superman. And the reason that I want to talk about Superman is because I find Superman to be a fascinating character. And that wasn't always the case. When I was younger, I didn't really do the whole superhero thing, but that doesn't mean that I didn't know of them. These are characters that are so prominent in our culture that you literally cannot go anywhere without seeing something of them or influenced by them. Whether that's you going to school and seeing somebody else with a Batman lunchbox, or you going to a friend's house and maybe they're watching the X-Men on TV. It doesn't matter. Everywhere you go, you are going to see these characters. They are a part of our culture. Now, why are they a part of our culture? We're going to get to, but we already kind of established that they are reflections of our culture. With Superman, however, I didn't like Superman. I mean, when it came to superheroes, I wasn't really big into any of them, but I did not like Superman in particular. When it came to Superman, I thought the Superman was boring. Okay? And that's because Superman is boring. When you talk about Superman, whether it's the original Golden Age Superman, Silver Age, Bronze Age, Dark Age, whatever it happens to be, Superman as a superhero is boring. And I will die on that hill. Superman as a character is super strong. He is super fast. He is super tough. And the ceiling for what Superman can do does not exist. Superman is literally as strong as he needs to be, as fast as he needs to be. He's as tough as he needs to be. He can lift literally anything, whether that be a car or a planet. He is fast enough to be in multiple places at once. He is tough enough to withstand even the greatest assault. Okay? His senses are acute enough that he literally sees and hears and feels everything. He is smart enough that he knows everything. Spider-Man's, or not Spider-Man, Superman's power can basically be summed up as yes. Okay? That is his superpower. His superpower is just yes. To everything, unless the question happens to be, can he lose? Because no, Superman cannot lose. That's who he is. And so I thought, and I still do think, that Superman is a very boring hero. Now, being boring as a hero does not mean that he doesn't have other qualities. And where I think that Superman lacks in terms of being, you know, this superhero, he more than makes up in being a person. Because again, when we talked about heroes and villains at the beginning, we talked about how our heroes and our villains are extensions of our cultures. They are the symbols of our morals and values and principles. Now, Superman, of course, at least before people that hated him got a hold of him, and that mostly happened just because as time went on, the people who were making the comics had no idea what they were dealing with either. And I can't blame them entirely. It took me almost 40 years to understand who Superman is. And I've had the benefit of a lot of years of introspection that I doubt the people who are actually writing Superman ever got. But Superman is a character who can do anything. Okay? And this is literally the premise behind the Injustice, the Injustice comic books, or comic book series, I guess. What would you call it? An epic? An arc? A campaign? I'm not sure what you would call it. But either way, he's a character who can do anything. If there is a war going on somewhere, he can stop it. If somebody is being mean, he can stop that person. If there's an asteroid that's going to crash into the Earth, he can stop that. If there's multiple things happening on the planet, he is fast enough to handle all of them. He can do anything. However, just because you can stop something does not mean that you have solved the problem necessarily. Yes, you can go to a war-torn area and literally massacre every soldier on the field, blow up every tank, every jeep, every artillery platform, and then twist every single rifle into a pretzel. Congratulations, you've stopped the war. But you haven't actually fixed the problem. In particular, I do remember that when this happened in the Injustice comics, because it's one of the few comics that I am actually quite familiar with. In the Injustice comics, he actually goes to a war zone and does just that. He stops the war. And then he travels to the presidential palace, rips the president out of the building, and tosses him to his enemies in the streets below. This is not solving the problem. The fight may have stopped, but the problem still remains. And that is the entire purpose of Superman. This is also, coincidentally, the entire purpose of Lois Lane. Lois Lane is not just there to be a love interest for Clark Kent / Superman. I mean, she is there for that. That's not her primary purpose. Her primary purpose is to represent the people. The people of Metropolis, the people of the world. The reason why he cannot just simply go out and wipe out whatever problem happens to be threatening things. Because if he were to do so, people would get hurt. The power to do anything, the power to stop anything, to destroy anything, absolute, unlimited, destructive power, Superman could literally rip the entire planet apart with his bare hands. And he chooses not to. And he chooses not to because he has the wisdom to realize that not everything can be solved with force. In fact, very few things can be solved with force. And even the very few things that can be solved with force generally don't stay that way in the long term. The power to do everything, to do anything, but the wisdom to know that the things that he needs to do to enact lasting change require no force at all. And that's why he also represented a firm foundation in morals and virtues and principles. It's why the tagline for Superman was truth, freedom, and the American way. And we'll get to that in a second too. But why? Truth. Because even though he has the ability to do anything, and that includes lying, because who's going to call Superman on lying, and who would survive even if they did? Superman realizes that telling the truth is paramount. Freedom. Because Superman has the ability, and in the Injustice comic books actually followed through with, enslaving the entire planet. And in fact, he could enslave multiple planets if he wanted to. There's literally nothing that can stop him. But he has to realize that people need to be free. And even the people that need to be stopped, the people that are doing harm, need to be free to both make those poor choices, and they need to be free to correct themselves. You cannot just force somebody to change. It doesn't work. You can stop them with force, you can stop them from hurting others, but you can never actually change somebody with force. And the American way was important for two reasons. Number one, because during the time when Superman came out, we were literally fighting the Nazis. So, kind of important there. However, America, for the longest time, and this is still true today, leads the world in terms of at least idealistic virtues. We fail on a daily basis to live up to our own standards. But that doesn't mean those standards aren't there, and that does not mean that they should not be aspired to by both us and, I'll go ahead and say it, everybody else in the world. Superman represents us, what we should be like, what we could be like if we were to all work together in common cause and common morals and values. This is what the symbol of Superman is. As a character, or rather as a superhero running around beating up aliens and things like that, he is absolutely boring. But when you look at who he is and what he needs to be, that's when Superman really shines. Because Superman could show up to, say, a hostage situation, and Superman is fast enough and strong enough to absolutely annihilate the entire building, murder all of the hostage takers, and save all the hostages. But he's also wise enough to know that if he does that, people might get hurt. And what really needs to happen is he needs to be able to talk the people down, to get them to come out, to surrender themselves, and to make a change for themselves. Now, in the real world, does that kind of thing always work? No, it seldom does. But that's not the point. The point is that he's an ideal for us to live up to. He is what we should be more like. And that's why it really brings into question Why is this a thing? Why are there so many people who would want to play this game that we made a game where we get to kill all these symbols that we held up as being the symbols of aspiration? All of those things that we are supposed to aspire to be more like, why are we going to kill them? And this is where the entire idea of the moral panic not being entirely wrong comes in. It is true, these people are annoying, okay? And in general, most of their complaints about the moral fracturing in our younger generations and in our media, this is where it actually kind of rings a little bit true. On the one hand, it is a video game. And by and large, most people would never think twice about it. They would play the game, and they would really take nothing more away from that. But the values that it's promoting, when you get the Suicide Squad together to kill Superman, you're not just killing Superman. You're killing the idea of Superman. You're saying that not only can we kill the man, but everything that he believed in can die with him. So all that stuff about truth? Nah, truth does not matter. You know what truth gets you? Truth gets you killed. Freedom? There's no freedom in the world. And the people who stand for freedom? Yeah, we just killed them. So, who cares? And the same thing goes for Batman. I mean, what does Batman stand for besides, poor prison policies? Ah, Tux is in the chat. Hello, Tux. When it comes to Batman, Batman teaches us about restraint. Batman teaches us about intelligence and the importance of personal growth and refinement. Batman is a normal person who goes up against all kinds of superpowered beings and even gods. Batman is there to show us that if we were to put in the effort, even we could do things. And yes, there's a lot of flaws in Batman, but Batman has never not been portrayed as a flawed individual. It's one of the things that brings him down and makes him human, but also makes him much more relatable. And it's one of the reasons why people love him, because people on a certain level can relate to him. He's not perfect, and sometimes he even does things that most people would kind of criticize, like the fact that he hasn't killed the Joker yet. But again, that's where the whole restraint thing comes in. Batman is the picture of restraint. In many different comics, in many different series and movies, he has stated as such. He would love to kill the Joker, but he can't. Because doing so would break something inside of himself and he would never be able to stop. However, when the Suicide Squad game comes out, we will kill Batman. And in doing so, we will also kill the idea of restraint. We didn't restrain ourselves from killing Batman. He restrained himself, and look where that got him. We are going to kill the Batman, and we are going to kill everything that he stands for as well. And again, this is where the people who are having the moral panic actually do have something to stand on. So where does this all lead up to? I want to take you back a couple of years, and we're going to finish up our lecture here. This is from the New York Times. I had a lot of options, but this one seemed like the best one. It's got a nice big picture on it. But this talks about how statues are falling all around the world. This is going back to primarily to the Summer of Love, which is something that we've talked about at great length, and I'm not going to revisit all of it here. I just want to talk about this one specific event well, or at least collection of events that happened during those times. Because, and we have to keep in mind that New York Times is a liberal cesspool, it says statues and monuments that have long honored racist figures are being boxed up, spray painted, or straight up beheaded. Because for a long time there, we had lots of people who went around the world tearing down every single statue that they did not like. Now, it started off with, let's see, here in Tennessee, this newspaper publisher, a statue of Edward Ward Carmack. So, Carmack was a lawmaker and newspaper editor in Nashville. Now, it says here he endorsed the lynching of 3 black men who were trying to open a grocery store and incited a mob to attack the newspaper editor, journalist, and activist Ida B. Wells. Don't know anything about that, but let's see. Carmack was shot dead in 1908 by the son of a political rival, and his statue was erected later on, and then they pulled it down. Now, I don't know anything about this guy. Maybe what he did do is true. However, I don't know what good he did either, because all they care about is the bad things he did. The same thing is true down here. In Richmond, Virginia, Robert E. Lee was vandalized, and as far as I know, to this day, remains vandalized, if they haven't removed it entirely already by now. Robert E. Lee, of course, was the Confederate general who led the insurrection by the South against the North after they declared their independence from the Union. Now, in his case, he is being branded as a racist, and that's pretty much it. The entire reason he's being branded as a racist is because he was the general for the Confederacy. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that he agreed with everything, and in fact, there's many accounts that say that he didn't necessarily agree with everything the Confederacy was doing, but he was a loyal Confederate, and when he was asked to lead the armies, he did so, as any loyal soldier would have. And so that one came down. But so far we have a newspaper editor who supposedly endorsed a lynching, and we have the Confederate general. Then we get down here to this William Carter Wickham, a Confederate cavalry commander. St. Paul, Minnesota, they took down Christopher Columbus. Now, what did Christopher Columbus do? Besides exploring and getting his landmasses wrong, because this is absolutely not India. Really nothing. I mean, they talk about how bad he was to all kinds of different people. We really do not have any kind of reports to that matter, and even if we did, there's no telling whether those reports would have been accurate or not. But it doesn't matter, because he represents something that they didn't like, and so they destroyed him. Let's see, in Boston, the head of the statue of Columbus was removed the same day, and in Miami and Kenosha, more statues of Columbus were defaced. In Columbus, Ohio, the mayor said the explorer's statue on the south side would be removed and placed in storage. In Washington, however, they went after the statue of Andrew Jackson. They were not able to remove that one, but it didn't stop them from trying. And so when we look at all these statues, we say, who were these people, and what does removing them actually say? See, when we talk about people like these slave traders, okay? These slave traders were pillars of the community during their time. They were people who funded entire governmental projects. They built great monuments. They pioneered entire industries. They literally built the nations that we stand on today. Now, by today's standards, is what they did wrong? Absolutely. But this is why we have to look at them as a product of their times. And Tux says, placed in storage means they'll hold on to it until they can quietly destroy it without anyone noticing. Probably. Because once in storage, once it's out of sight, out of mind, nobody will ever know the difference. Not until somebody goes looking for it and finds it missing. But these people literally built entire towns, cities, industries, which is why they got statues in the first place. And then we get to some people, which I don't know if they have them here. Let's see. In Dallas, a statue of a Texas Ranger was put into storage. The Texas Rangers are a symbol of the entire state. Jefferson Davis was removed from the Kentucky Capitol. He was the leader of the people of the Confederacy. He was the duly elected leader of the Confederacy. And he tried to lead his people to independence. But now he's being branded as a racist and he needs to be gone. In New York, Theodore Roosevelt will also be gone. What did he have to do with slavery? What did he have to do with the slave trade? We have to do with anything. So Roosevelt, see. Statue of the 26th president has stood in the Museum of Natural History, will be removed. But I don't see it saying anything. Oh wait, no, hold on. But this, the symbolism of the Native American man and the African man who stood beside him. And that's the end of the article. Otherwise, though, Roosevelt was a great president. And he did great things. He was a great person who could be and should be aspired to. But this is not even a comprehensive article. They have also removed statues of George Washington. They have removed statues of James Adams. They've removed statues of Abraham Lincoln. And those are just the three presidents that I can think of at the moment. They've removed statues of abolitionists, just because they didn't like them. They have removed statues of all of these figures, and they all use the same argument. The same argument is, this person was a racist. Okay? It's the only argument they have, and the only argument that they really care about, because they don't actually need arguments. They just want less people to oppose them. But the fact is that when they tear down these statues, they're not tearing down just the iron and bronze of a person who existed. They're tearing down the ideas of them. And everything that those people stood for. Robert E. Lee was the Confederate general who led the Confederacy in the Civil War. To the best of my knowledge, he was not a slave owner. He was a loyal soldier. And he embodied everything that a soldier should be. He fought for his nation, he fought for his country and his people. He fought with honor, he fought with dedication, he respected his duty. The only thing that Robert E. Lee was guilty of was losing. Which is the ironic part there, because had they won, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. Had they won, it is very likely that the Confederacy would have had slavery for a very long time, possibly even through today. Which means that all these people would never have had the freedom to protest in the first place. It's also the same argument that we could have made for people like George Washington, because had George Washington lost the Revolution, there would be no freedom to protest over here in the US at all. In fact, the US would not even be the US. We would still be the colonies of Britain. So in tearing down the statues, in killing the memory of these people, we are also killing the things that they stood for. And this is why I wanted to talk about heroes and villains. These people are absolutely heroes. They may not be your personal hero, but that doesn't mean they are not heroes in their own regards. And as heroes, they are symbols. None of them are alive today. We have no idea who these people really were or what they were really like. We don't know what they were like behind closed doors. We don't know what their personal hobbies were, what they like to collect, what they like to craft or fashion. We don't know any of that about them. All we have left of them are their deeds and the things that they fought for. And so we look at what they did. We look at the good things in their life, the things that they were able to build, the things that they fought for, the virtues and principles by which they stood. And now by killing the memory of them, we eliminate those morals and virtues and principles as well. And why would we do this? Well, it's very simple. So long as you have these heroes in place, so long as you have memories that link to the past, you can never truly take over a culture. And that's why we are in a culture war right now. The objective is that we want, or at least they want, to take our culture over and annihilate all of us. And anybody who is not annihilated will just have to be subjugated. On the same level, though, we do want to do the same thing to them. The entire left, we want to annihilate. We want to send them and their ideas back to wherever they came from, and we want to purge it from our nation and our culture. This is inevitable. This is what happens when two cultures collide. And that's exactly what we have here. Whereas we have these moral panics over, what video game is coming out, or what television show is now on Amazon, or what the cartoons are doing. They're the ones who are actually producing it. As I said before, the fact that these shows even exist at all is really a commentary on who we are as a culture. The fact that we can have a show that actively does promote and glorify hell, they have a point. It's not a very good point, but that doesn't mean that they don't have one. It absolutely is glorifying hell, and even if it just moves the needle a sliver in their direction, the needle has still moved. And if you can just move it one sliver at a time, little by little, it's taking a mile by way of inches. Which, by the way, is the origin of that phrase, if you let them take an inch, they will take a mile. It doesn't mean that if you let them take an inch, they're going to just grab the mile, right? No, it means that if you give them an inch, they will take another inch, and another inch, and another inch, until they have taken that mile from you, and now you are a mile back from where you started. The only way to stop them from taking the mile is to stop them from taking the inch. Which is why, when I look at things like this and I can say, Hazbin Hotel, I like it, but it probably shouldn't have existed. The same thing is true for this Suicide Squad. I don't like it, and I'm not going to play it. Don't really care. However, Grand Theft Auto? Man, I play Grand Theft Auto. Did you play Grand Theft Auto? I bet you play Grand Theft Auto. Is it a fun game? Oh, hell yes, it is a fun game. Should it have ever have existed, though? Probably not. It probably never should have existed. And again, this goes back to our culture, because somebody had to come up with the idea for this. Now, why did they come up with the idea with this? Okay? What led them to the position where they thought that maybe Grand Theft Auto was a really great idea for a game? And then they went to a publisher and said, hey, I got an idea. I want to make a game called Grand Theft Auto. You run around and steal cars and kill people. And that publisher had to say, you know what? I'm good with it. Thumbs up. Go make it. You can see the small failings every step along the way. the places where the culture and community failed to step in. Which is why I say I really don't care about Grand Theft Auto. This idea that Grand Theft Auto or Mortal Kombat or Suicide Squad or Hazbin Hotel or any of this stuff is going to suddenly change the culture. I mean, you're looking at the symptom of the problem and trying to say, oh, how do we fix this? It's like, well, you fix this by going back and fixing it at the root. And it does perpetuate this going forward, because if Grand Theft Auto was okay, well then Grand Theft Auto 2 must have been, right? And Grand Theft Auto 3 must have been fine after 2, right? And now we're up to 6. 30 years this game has been around. 30 years. That's 3 generations. It does show what our culture has become. And it shows what our values have become. We don't value the same thing anymore. We do not value strength. We do not value freedom. We do not value truth. We do not value humility. We don't value any of these things anymore. And how do we know this? Because it's shown in our media. The media is a lens of ourselves. It is a projection of everything that we think, believe, and feel. And in that way, the people who are talking about the moral panic are right. Now, are they going about fixing it in the right way? Absolutely not. They're going to fail every single time. As a matter of fact, you can't stop this. We're way past the point of stopping this kind of thing. It'll never happen. What we need to do is we need to actually rebuild our own culture. We need to find the things that we value and we need to promote those. That means that we actually do need to take characters like Superman. And we need to put them back where they belonged. We need to make them the pinnacles of what they used to be anymore. Not giving them to Zack Snyder so we can have Superman tear-assing through New York City again and murdering some 10,000 people. And it doesn't mean that we go along with the people that made Injustice and say, you know what, just let him be a tyrant. It means that we actually have to go back to the roots of these characters to take them back so that they can be aspirational again. We should all want to be more like Superman. That's what he was there for in the first place. We should all want to be more like Captain America. That's what he was there for in the first place. And until we get back to that point, there's really not much point in discussing any of this in the first place. That's why I say that, you know, a lot of this moral panic stuff can easily be ignored because it's fringe. Nobody really cares. But just because it's fringe and no one cares doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong. They're just wrong in the way they go about it. But both their heart and their head are technically in the right place. They just need the right actions to go along with it. So with that, I think we're going to wrap things up here. See, this is what I like to do. This is why I like to tell stories with my games. I like to go through and follow these heroic stories. I want to try and make things that are aspirational in some way. Just a small way. Just a small way. To push the right ideas and values through things. It doesn't always work. Particularly when I try to use RimWorld to do that. But I still keep trying. But hopefully you can use this as your own lens to go through and look at the culture that we're in, particularly when it comes to media. When you look at your movies, your TV shows, and your games, look at not just, you know, what are they doing, but go ahead and ask yourself, why are they doing this? And don't just give yourself the typical answer of, well, they're doing it to make money. Yes, they are doing it to make money. But there are so very many ways to make money. why would they choose this one? And I mean, this applies to anything in life. You can look at anybody who's trying to make money and say, you know, why are you doing it this way? If you're a petty thief, why would you choose to be a thief? If you're a burglar, why would you choose to do that? If you make your life stealing cars, why would you choose to do that? There are other ways to do things. And when it comes to making our media, there are other ways to do this. Disney is learning that lesson very hard right now, because Disney had spent decades building up its company, building up its reputation, building up its image, and now they have pissed it all away. They pissed it all away in Marvel phases, what was it, 4, 5, 6, I think? I don't know, I haven't been paying attention because it's all garbage. They've pissed it away in Star Wars, where they went through and they had to correct all the missteps of the previous generations and the previous movies. They've pissed it away in all of their Disney properties, you know, the original Disney properties, which they say need to be updated for modern times. Because the values that they hold today obviously are not the same values that they held back then. But the values they held back then are the same values that we hold now. We haven't changed. They have. Hence why we have the cultural backlash now against Disney. They changed. They are now the invasive culture. And that is why we now have the moral panic against Disney as well. Because that's what happens every time you have an invasive culture. There is a backlash. So look at this the next time you look at any cartoons, any movies, any shows, any games. Ask yourself, why did they make the choices they did when they were doing this? Or, if you don't want to do the thinking yourself, you can always go look up other YouTubers who do that too. My suggestions would be Mauler or Rags, or just go look up the EFAP podcast. Pretty much everybody who's on EFAP does the same thing. So Little Platoon is on there. He does stuff like that. I love Little Platoon. He's great. So if you don't want to do the thinking yourself, go listen to them do their thinking. It'll be worth your time if you've got a few hours. But with that, I do not have a few hours. I actually have a lot of stuff I got to get done today, so I got to go ahead and break it off here. So thank everybody for coming. It was good to see everybody here. It was good to see Tux again. Haven't seen you in a while. Been missing you. Thank you, JP. Thank you, Blizz, for coming. And I think that was everybody, or at least everyone I saw in the chat. If anybody else showed up, I didn't actually get to see them. It's all right, though. But thank you all for coming. I will see everybody that wants to come, at least, for the tabletop stream tomorrow. We're going back to work on Tau vehicles, so that should be fun. I think I've got the Tau troop carrier worked out. I guess we'll find out. I hate the vehicle section so much. Anyway, though, I will see you the next time, either tomorrow for the tabletop stream or next week for the next lecture. And so, subscribe if you want to see it. Hit the bell icon if you want to get notified about it. Share this video if you think somebody else would enjoy it. And if you just like me, leave a like on the stream. Leave comments down below. Join the Discord. It's kind of quiet over there. So, you know, come make some noise. And I will see you next time for whatever I have next. Not sure what it'll be. But until then, take care.